everybody, this is Cathryn Lynne, and welcome to Music is Not a Genre, the interview edition. Today, I have with me the wonderful Nick DeMatteo. Hi, Nick.
Hi.
And this is the second season of the interview edition. And funny note, last season, the first one, I was the very first guest ever that Nick interviewed. So for this one, we are turning the tables, and I will be interviewing Nick DeMatteo. How are you today?
I am very good, thank you.
Yes, it's very exciting to have you in this seat.
It is. I really appreciate you suggesting this and doing this. And I'm very excited about it.
And so for anybody, if this is your very first time tuning into this, still getting cozy with Nick and his background. He is a musician first, singer, songwriter, a VO artist, an actor of stage and screen. You've run your own production company, you've owned a film company, a man of many parts. And now you're doing this podcast. You've been doing the podcast, Music is Not a Genre, for 4 seasons and the interview edition for 2, right?
That's right. I started the podcast way back in late 2019.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think we're just going to kick right on in with some questions and see how we can get this second season really rocking.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So my first question to you is, now that you've been doing the whole podcast for now 4 seasons, and now you're in your second round of the interview edition, and you've been able to interview a lot of really interesting people with very varied backgrounds, how has the whole podcast, but particularly the interview edition, changed your perspective on maybe where music is, or just your outlook on your community of fellow artists? What has changed about you now that you've done a first season?
What has changed about me?
Yeah, your perspective.
You know, I think that it's always important to look outside yourself. And as much as we think we're doing that, let's say you're listening to another kind of music or any kind of exploration, if you're doing it by yourself, you're not going as far as you think you're going. So bringing somebody else in there and talking with them, and really more than anything, listening. Because most of the questions I ask come from listening to what they're saying. And then I say, oh, I want to know more about that. That really brings you outside yourself. And so it's the kind of understanding what it really feels like to separate who you are, what you are, from what anyone else is or anything else out there. And I think that the big change is the more people I talk to, the more grounded I become in who I am as an artist.
Nice. So how has it changed your perspective, particularly on music, like where music is today and your own musical journey? Because you have produced many albums. You just put out 5 EPs, you know, in the last 2 years. And I mean, the podcast is called Music is Not a Genre. So how has it turned the tables on that initial idea?
I think the biggest, I don't know if it's surprise, but maybe just, pleasant surprise, is that everyone I've talked to is as open to the idea of music as a whole crossing genres and not being defined and confined by genres as I am. And that's very reassuring, because we live in a world where things need to be labeled in order to be understood. And it's comforting for people to be able to say, this is this is that, this person is this, or this kind of music. So to have some, for it to be kind of validated that there are other people like me out there in whatever capacity, musicians or listeners or fans, who also can hear these connections in different types of music and what that means, it's just incredibly reassuring.
That's wonderful. Do you think that you're not alone in that, because the people that you seek out to do interviews with are well, for lack of a better way of putting it, musically inclined, like you're reaching out to fellow artists. And even though their backgrounds are varied, or just music lovers on a whole, they're in the arts, they're in that kind of a groove. Do you think that maybe if you were reaching out to people who weren't in that grouping, would maybe feel more inclined to latch on to genres for their identity?
Yeah, I think, I mean, you're absolutely right, because anybody inside of something knows it so well that they're seeing way more than anybody else does. So a musician is going to see and hear way more things about music than a non-musician, unless you're one of those aficionados who doesn't play an instrument but listens to, like every kind of jazz or hard bop or something, and you're like, oh, I can hear, and it that way. But then to me, you're almost at the same level as being inside the music. So, so somebody, your question was, what was your question again?
Well, I was saying, like, so you're focusing right now on talking to kindred spirits, to talking to people who really are connected to music, to where they are trying to experience it for something more than maybe just face value. So in the realm of music is not a genre, do you think that if you were to connect with people who aren't artists in that particular way, you know what I mean? Do you think that possibly, I don't know, maybe they'd be more connected to wanting there to be genres, like maybe not being as open to the possibility of music not having a genre, just because for them, they need to feel that sort of connection to category?
Yeah, and
you'll never know unless you actually go and ask people.
Right, and I don't want to have a bias, because I think that across all types of people, musicians, non-musicians, and anyone else, there is a type. There are several types, and there is a type who actively seeks out connections and breaking boundaries and everything. Like, there are active listeners out there, and I think everyone, I would say almost everybody, almost every single day hears at least one piece of music somewhere in their lives. But there's a difference between passive listening, like, oh, that's music, I heard it, and active listening and really becoming engaged. And I think those who are active listeners are often able to go past that idea of genre, but that everyone, including people who understand that, genre is a label, needs those labels. I mean, as much as I talk about this, and the title of the whole thing is "Music is not a genre," I love the idea of genres in the sense that I'm somebody who likes to classify and categorize, and I'd be terrible at a library, because I'd be like, well, but this book could go here, but it could also go in this category, it can also go in that category. And I love categories so much, but I can never see a type of book or music or whatever just falling into a single category. So I'm kind of like split down the middle there, where I love being able to say, there's a difference between emo and screamo, and be able to define what that is to some extent, but then to be also to be able to say, but that screamo band is also doing kind of like post-punk and what, and show that all these labels I'm using cross so much that eventually they kind of start to lose meaning.
I never knew about the screamo category.
Oh, I was a big fan of that in the mid-O's. Yeah, early mid-O's. Yeah.
Emo and screamo. That's amazing. And I know a lot about how you feel and think about this particular topic, obviously. But I don't think I really understood how much you love actually categorizing things, but the fact that so many things fall into so many different areas is a distinction or a nuance I didn't really know until right now. So that's really cool.
You once said to me that if you love connection so much, why don't you go out and find it? And
why don't you go out and do it? And you did.
And the thing, and I did, right? With that prodding, but but where it started even before then is any connections I might have made, on a human level have been anywhere from wonderful to super awkward, because that's just how my makeup, on the inside is that way. So where it really started for me was in something like music probably more than anything, even television. It was where Well, if I don't necessarily know how to relate, you know, on a human, open, like vulnerable level to somebody because of shyness or fear or whatever, I can find that in the music. So I would latch on to those ideas and just and start to feel that sense of connection in there. And the connection went from me to the music, but then it also went from that music to other artists, to other things that are, you know, non-music related. When you think about, let's say, Baroque, you know, classical music came during the Baroque visual art period, and you understand how those two things connect because there are intricacies and flourishes that didn't happen prior to that in both the visual and the sonic. So those, you know, those connections made me feel like I was more a part of the world, even at times when I was maybe unable to connect as fully with humans.
Yeah, music has always been a real lifeline.
Always.
You're gonna have to forgive me for 1 second. So, because you are much more adept at working with audio than I am, I have already clinked my ice and hit a printer because that's who I am. So let me just take one moment and clink my ice one more time by drinking this.
Fun. Yeah. Listen, everyone. This is the quiet talk.
Please pay me thousands of dollars for that. Okay.
Right.
So getting back on track. So just to one more question in this area that I'm really interested in. So the need for genre then, and in you exploring people who are artists and connected to music and maybe listening with that little bit of an extra antenna when they hear music, being open to genres interweaving and whatnot. And then, you know, not trying to suppose what people maybe who are not musicians are liking and not liking. And maybe that's your third season of the interview edition. So then the need for genre then why? Then why do you think overall does, like, again, has this interview series made you reflect on why these things even exist at all? I mean, is it really just that major corporations and companies and, you know, we had to get more streamlined in how to categorize people, so people, you know, the giant higher ups could just track where the trends were and stuff like that, and sound as far as people buying? Like, is it a consumerism type mechanism, you think, or how has your perspective changed around that since you started this? About why they exist in the first place.
About why they exist in the first place.
Yeah. Do you think there's something different about it now than before?
I think the more I've explored it, the more I realize there are really two aspects of it. And one is, like you said, it's corporate. And I'm not even necessarily criticizing this more than pointing it out, which is that, you know, if you, as we know, because we run a t-shirt business and whatever, that when you sell something, you need a concise way to tell people what it is. And the hardest part about that is not telling people what it is, but trying to decide what it isn't. Right. Because when you see it so deeply, it's hard to know what it isn't. You'll say, well, it could be this, it could be philosophy, it could be humor, it could be whatever, you know. And so to be able to narrow it down to say, well, listen, it's 7 different things, but I've got to pick one, because there's no way you're going to, people need an inroad. People need that kind of like initial thing, like, oh, okay, it's this. And I think my if I have a criticism about it, it's that it's yes, I think there are better ways to do it, and corporations and ad companies and in the industry can do a better job at that, and some are, and so many musicians are, but that we as listeners have a responsibility to look beyond those labels and to be open to the idea that just because something is called, let's say, country, and maybe your knee jerk is either you love country, you hate country, listen to it first, because you may hear something in that song where you're like, oh, that's country, but that's also, you know, R&B or something like that. And so you're going beyond what you're being fed. And I think that's our responsibility across the board, because no matter how much we may want the system to change, it takes forever to change. And that to me goes to the second part of why these things have come to be, which is, I think humans, we all, this goes back thousands of years. I'm reading this book now about human culture, and it's called Sapiens. And the chapter I just read was all about gender, and how gender labels are things that or gender descriptions have changed over the centuries. That the most masculine male in the 18th century wore stockings and high heels and a wig, and all of that. And that labels have changed and expanded. And the fact that, there are certain social media sites that have like 26 different labels for gender now is wonderful, but it also points out the problem that we are also desperate to try to name things. It's almost like that biblical thing, like flower, possum, that we overlook the fact that a name is not a description. That you could call me a man or half Italian, half Hungarian, but that doesn't at all describe who I am or what I'm like. And that cuts across every single kind of music you can possibly think of, other than Kid Rock. No, sorry. I kid rock.
Oh my. Here we go. We're feeling warmy now.
Yeah, we're in it in deep.
I mean, it's a really nuanced conversation, which is why it's a great topic, because there's just so many layers to peel back, and I could get really, really, really picky with how we move forward.
I love that.
But that's excellent. All of that is excellent. I mean, the need for labeling is just a really broad subject, and something that's happening, I think, way outside of music. And also not just the fact that we label things or that there are genres, but just that, like you're saying, like there's such a grand scope of labels and genres that there could be, but only a certain nugget of them get any attention or get any, awareness. And that's really it, is that there's not a fair amount of attention that is put on the vast majority of how many quote unquote categories there are, when there is enough room for all. I mean, do you agree?
Everything we've seen in the last 20 years, how there's enough room for everything because of the internet, and it certainly it predates that, but that makes it concrete, and I just did a podcast where I was talking about how artists who do things that are considered out of their wheelhouse get into trouble by the industry and sometimes by the fans, because they're like, well, that's not what I expected. You're not supposed to do that. You only do, pop, R&B tinged pop rock or whatever it is. And now you want to do experimental progressive rock. Well, no, I'm not gonna, and there's where the limitation arises, because I would say most music that is made in history, but especially today, falls through the cracks in between genre labels. So, and unless something pops out to a listener, and especially an industry listener, that says, oh, I can classify this well enough to put it here, let's go for it and sell it. If something like that doesn't pop out in a song or an artist or an album, then they don't know what to do with it. And I think that's not only an artificial limitation, I think it's a mistake. I think it's learned behavior. I don't think it's instinctive behavior. I think we're so afraid to, push something that seems unclassifiable because we're afraid that people won't accept it, that we don't even try. And what I've seen is that every single time that's been tried, it has somehow worked, even if it's in a small way. But in many ways, it's worked in a huge way, to the point where that thing that we were afraid of, that was released into the wild, into the listening world, 5 years later, changed the face of music and became its own new classification.
So so going off of that, so does something come to mind that you would say this is a wonderful I think lack of a better way of putting it, like proof of concept, like proof of that idea. Like, I mean, is there something that, or an artist that comes to mind where people were sure they had to be in one category, and then all of a sudden just broke all the rules, came out, and it worked beautifully? And if not that, because I don't want to put you on
No.
2 hours, but I know you have a giant catalog of those instances, I'm sure.
Sometimes.
Either that, or who do you think is the most genre bending artist out there right now that does get credit and is celebrated for it? Maybe two-part,
right.
take your time, it's okay, no dead air, we'll be fine.
Yeah, I wish I could say right now I know of this hot new artist. I mean, you could in some sense say Lady Gaga, because she's still considered very contemporary and is able to hop through all kinds of music and be accepted doing that. But this brings up a point that I was going to make based on your question, which is, then you could say somebody like David Bowie, you could say somebody like Prince, you can even say somebody like the Beatles, whose early, mid, and late albums just sound so little like each other, and yet there's a through line and a continuity that they kept breaking barriers. And the difference and I would say you kind of almost have to discount all of those people, because they have established that they can successfully genre hop and sound hop and whatever. After their first, let's say 3 or 4 times doing that, the public was like, oh, that's who they are. Okay, cool. Then their world is so expansive that they can do anything. And so they're in a different category.
So now they've created their own
genre
of non-genre
conforming. Whereas you have somebody like, and I don't know why this popped into my head, because this artist is not really on my list, but you have somebody like Garth Brooks, who in the grunge era broke off and did Chris Gaines.
Sure did.
Right?
Sure did.
And I haven't listened deeply to any of that stuff, but from what I recall, there was a lot of quality to both the country and this kind of like rock thing that he was doing. And yet it was kind of laughed off. And I don't know if that maybe deterred him from pursuing it, and that's why he dropped it, or maybe he just did it once and was like, I'm cool with it, that's all I needed to do. But I think those are the kind of things where an artist that is known for doing only one thing, and that one thing may be great, but really only one thing, and then goes off and does this other thing, it's almost always initially like, you are nuts, dude. Like, what are you doing? And yet there have been plenty of times, I think, in history where if that artist stuck with it and said, no, I'm going to go ahead and do it again, then eventually someone will look back in hindsight and say, that first try, I was actually really good. I was just freaked out by it because I wasn't expecting it.
Well, and how many artists, that do gain some sort of commercial success and then do have another album or something that goes off the rails for whatever people consider them to be, I don't know, normal. And they do put it out there. It just doesn't get any of the notoriety that the first, look did. And I think most artists do that. It's just more under the radar. So you don't realize that there are a lot more multifaceted artists out there. It's just that, we get fed the one thing the higher ups think it should be all the time. Because like you were just played me this Hall & Oates album and said, I didn't know who it was. And you said, who do you think this is? And to my credit, you had just been on a massive Red Hot Chili Peppers kick. And even though I knew the voice did not sound like anybody from the Red Hot Chili Peppers, the sound was funky and kind of in that realm. And you said Hall & Oates, or
Daryl Hall.
Hall. Yeah. Pardon me.
Yeah.
And this was after, there had been some success. But this was very off the cuff from what that was.
After there had been some success, but not enough success for the record company to give them the okay, is what I think. So he recorded it in '77 with Robert Fripp, and very progressive dude. And I'm not sure how they got together, but hey, great. And it was unreleased for 3 years. until Hall & Oates had, I guess, what they considered enough hits to be like, all right, we can let this go now, and it's not going to ruin anything. It's not going to ruin his career or reputation.
Your exploration as an artist won't ruin everything you've done so far.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's just so stupid.
Like, how dare they, right? How dare they say that there wouldn't be a fan base for that kind of thing? It may not be the same fan base. There'll be some crossover, but then it might win new fans. I now can hear, or will probably hear, some Hall & Oates stuff in a new light based on what I heard from this album, Sacred Songs.
Yeah.
Because of that.
Yeah.
It's the same with when there's a couple of examples. Ice-T put out a rock album. Now he had a bass and different kinds of music to begin with, but he put out a rock album. It was not ignored. It was actually reviewed and everything, but it didn't do that well. The Beastie Boys, who we know have that kind of dual punk hip hop background, didn't abandon the punk side of it, and not just because of Sabotage, but they put out an album in the 90s called Alio e Olio, and it was straight up punk. The entire thing was punk. There was no rapping on it or anything like that. And you know, critics liked it, or whoever likes the Beastie Boys liked it. And to my mind, for that kind of punk, it was one of the best punk albums of the 90s.
Wow.
But it came and went. You know, now the difference is the industry did learn something between 1977 and 1990, whatever, which is that it's still worth it to just put it out.
Sure.
It may not get the promotion that an artist wants, or the attention, or the reviews or whatever, but why not just put it out? And that's one of the good things about these days, is that pretty much every damn thing that is created that an artist doesn't put under lock and key is released in some way. You can find it. If it's not on, look beyond the streaming services, because they don't have everything. A lot of it is on YouTube, but somewhere out there you can find it. So there has been a bit of a learning curve.
Well, if anybody's going to find it, you'd be the one to find it.
I'll keep looking.
Excuse me, water break.
You
singing Phenomena?
Yeah.
Is that our interlude?
That's yes, exactly. We're put on hold.
Exciting. Well, now that we've gotten a good handle on, you know, the evolution of music is not a genre, nor kind of where it's at, let's go ahead and kind of shift back to your personal evolution. So, you know, it's usually said that what you focus on expands, right? When you start to really dig in and hone in on something. And for you, that was that, you know, connection for this idea and how other people felt about it, and just other people out there that you were connected to who are artists. And you're going full steam ahead into this second season of the interview edition. So now that you're really focused on this, what has happened? Does it mean that your eyes are only on the possibilities of where this could go as far as the interview edition and the regular podcasts and what to talk about and where the conversation is? Or has focusing on this project, I don't know, opened up creativity in other areas of your life? Has this been like a springboard for some other things? Because you're a multifaceted person, definitely, you know, you're a very creative person and you've done a lot of things. And so do you find that this is sort of, just helping you see other parts of yourself that you want to explore? Or is it just you want to see how far you can take this before anything else gets in the way, for lack of a better way of putting it? And there's no right or wrong in either of it. It's just, like I said, it's just funny that when we take our energies and just put them on one thing, where that grows, where it really heads.
I mean, that's a great question. I think on the one hand, you're right that the more you do something, you know, the more, you know, infused you are with that, whatever it is, which is why I always say, or always, whatever, I learned to say, be careful what you do, because that will in some way become you. And so if you're like, well, I'm only doing this because of such and such, but if you're doing it for dozens of hours a week, then a big part of you is that, whether you want it to be or not. And so part of what this has done for me is allowed me to focus in on only the things that I want to be spending my time doing. One of those does happen to be talking incessantly, you know,
And here we are.
usually about music, but often about other topics, which is why I do other offshoots like Music is Everything. How does that tie into politics or social change and stuff?
Fair, it's not just to hear your own voice talking, because you're an excellent listener. And I mean, isn't that really just your need, like you were saying in the beginning, that's how you communicate, that's how you connect with people, is through talking.
Oh, God,
so
yes.
is that fair to say?
That's very fair to say. And I think that there is a difference between lecturing and an act, you know, kind of like a talk exchange, like a conversation. And that's why I always end my podcast with music, conversation, and connection, or my 3 objectives. It doesn't mean that I always get there, but if I don't get there, it may be because I haven't received the feedback that I would like from people. Like I welcome comments of all kinds, whether they agree or not. And so the first step is you have to put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
You know, don't ask, just do. So don't wait for somebody to say, I want to hear you talk about music, or how do you tie the, breaking through of a trend in music that doesn't seem to fit with the breaking through of a social idea in politics or social change that doesn't seem to fit. Nobody asked me to do that, but my hope is that does start a conversation in some way, and so that is part of I seek that connection, but in some ways I'm also seeking change. I'm seeking kind of, I ask the question of, are you truly open-minded? And in a different podcast.
To yourself.
To everybody, myself included.
Okay.
We all, most of us think we're open-minded in some ways, and in some ways we are. But I think that when we're really challenged by something,
and our defenses come up.
Yes, when it feels uncomfortable in some way, then we have to say, well, do we have the ability to step back, take the emotion out of it for a second, and allow that to sink in and really understand, A, why it makes us uncomfortable, B, what it really means, and then C, then judge how we really feel about it. Because that first knee-jerk reaction, I don't think it's not the whole truth. And it's the thing that tends to prevent acceptance and connection and change. Because
it's mostly just you're being reactionary from your conditioning.
Yes.
Whether that be your upbringing or whatever it is that you've just, habitually been exposed to. Oh, that's what that defense is. And that goes into actually, your identity and how you've been, and we've all been categorized by society, really, right? And so when someone challenges our identity, whether we agree with it or not, that's when our defenses can come up, because it's what we think we know. Is that fair to say? Oh, God, absolutely. Yeah, we are conditioned. And I don't think, and I never want this to sound like it is a judgment, because I try to use the word we a lot, because it includes 100% of people in the world, me and you and everybody else, in that it's more, I think maybe if you're asking about what I've learned or what changed in all this, is that more than anything, openness and awareness are vital, because we can all fall prey at different days and weeks and times in our lives to shutting down, to being reactionary and defensive, to holding our position to a detriment, because we should have positions and stand firm in them. Yeah.
But there should be an openness to, well, again, connection. How does my position connect with somebody else's position, even if it doesn't seem like it does? And that comes from openness and awareness, which encompasses things like, listening in between your talking and things like that.
So this whole project, this whole venture, this whole life is just a catalyst for the bigger conversations. And you want to be able to keep having the space and the time to be able to have them. That's one thing.
Yeah. The more, the better, and And a lot of that, and I think a lot of what people do comes from their own kind of inner need to want to be accepted by the world and validated by the world,
Yeah.
and understood by the world and heard. And
Mhm.
I certainly would say that that's part of my motivation here too, is that like my youngest son is, the thing that frustrates him most is that he doesn't feel like he's always heard when
Mhm.
he's saying something. And that doesn't stop when you grow up.
Not at all.
We may be beaten into submission and say like, well, nobody's going to listen to me, so screw it. But the one time no one is going to listen to you is when you don't say anything. So open your mouth
Mhm.
and say, uh, get with your hands and do whatever it is that you put out into the world. Somebody's going to see it or hear it, and you may not get the response that you want, or you may not get it right away, but if it's out there, then it's making an impact in some way. And so and that, I think, if my obsession has been something other than music, I'd still be doing this. If it was woodwork or whatever it was,
Mhm.
like another Nick Offerman. I don't know much about him, but but I would still be talking, because underneath it all is that same motivation, which is create to connect. That's what so many artists and crafts people do, is you're creating to connect. And all of this is, it's become its own thing, and I think it has its own value. But a lot of it, like, it's still just a front for me just wanting people to listen to my music. That's really, if all of this disappeared, I'd still talk about music. I'd still talk to people about music, but the percentages of what I do might change, because the one thing that means the most to me in my creative and working world is my music. Period. That's why it started. That's why I started this as a blog in 2016. Was as a way to promote my music, and I grew to love this thing in itself, and to make it as good as I can make it aside from that. But that's still really the initial impulse.
Laying it all out.
Yeah, to be honest, right?
And is that because, this is a lot of work around, promotion. That's what we're
Yeah.
really talking about. Um, and is that because, whether you call yourself an artist, not you particularly, but anybody listening to this, whether or not you call yourself specifically an artist, and I think the word artist is a mindset as opposed to exactly what you do. Like, I think you can totally be an accountant and be artistic at it. You know what I mean? You don't have to be a musician or a painter or any of that. You can be any profession and approach it with an artistic mindset in how I see it. But whether or not you call yourself an artist or not, whatever it is we do or create in the world, we're hoping that that is our greatest offering. So that is our greatest connection point, because it's hopefully coming from the most honest place of ourselves. Is that why you think that no matter what you're doing, as far as talking about music is not a genre, interviewing people, talking more about other things, who knows how many podcasts could be spinning off of this one. Stay tuned, everybody. No, just kidding. Yes. But no matter how many other things may be spin-offs, is it that you believe, you feel that you 100% that your music is your greatest connection point, or that's what you want to be your greatest connection? It's your offering to the world above all else. Is that why all of this is happening, really? To take it away from just the listen to my music, give me less than half a cent for listening to it streaming. You know what I mean? Like, is that, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but, or is there something else about it? Like, why is it all just, again, back to your music?
Yeah. When I
started, really big setup, so don't worry. Take your time.
Great.
Take your time. It's a big setup.
Very, very good at this. When I started, when people have kids, it changes your life. in ways that you do not choose, let's say, because every kid is different, every family is different. But in many ways you can and do choose, and maybe it's conscious or not. And when I started having kids, I knew I had to choose that my time would be more limited by design and by choice, because you want to be a parent, you want to spend as much time with your kids as possible in many ways. I needed to decide what was important to me. So, throughout my teens and 20s, I was doing music and acting and creative writing. I had written novels and parts of novels and poetry and all this shit. And I have books of that. But you can't do it all. And the thing is, whether that was starting to have kids, whether that was getting into a new job that takes up time, or other things that complicate your life, every single step of the way in the last 20 plus years, the one thing that keeps coming back to me is not just music, yes, but my music. That is the one thing that if they said you only have 3 minutes of a week to do anything creative, that would be what it would be. And it's because it's been with me since I was born. I wrote songs before I could actually had very good grammar or anything like that. And it's the way that I still feel the most comfortable expressing myself. And it is the thing I think that of anything I've done creates the most value. It is the most developed, of any other type of thing that I've ever tried to do. And yeah, and it's the most personal. And the funny thing I've seen with other artists is that often the thing that they become famous for is not always the thing that's most personal to them. So you hear about an actor who's a huge success, a huge star. Did you know that they also wrote songs or whatever it is? And if you asked them, there's a real good chance they would say that it's that music that was more important to them than the millions of dollars they make doing movies. So, hey, listen, this podcast gets picked up by whatever, and I'm, making a giant living on it. I'm not going to say no to that, but the answer will still be, Rec just released an album called Synergy for the Weird. Go listen to that, and thank you so much for watching a movie I was in or whatever it was, but please go listen to my old friend of mine from high school reposted a post that I just put up about the Many Saints of Newark, which I had a very small role in. In that post, she said, support, Highland High School, alum, Nick DeMatteo was in this film, and he also has a band, Rec. And I would have been grateful that she reposted the movie, but the fact that she put that in there, I was like, I haven't seen this person in 30 years. She understands. And that's all I've ever wanted.
Well, we know quite a few people who you're still connected to, like when you were, before you moved to New York City, and when you were gigging in Philly and in New Jersey, who, whenever they seem to reconnect with you, they're always enamored with the idea that you are still doing your music, because so many people can burn out because it's hard, because so many things are hard, because it doesn't always pay the bills, and that kind of stuff. And unfortunately, we're in a time when that is you can't get away from it, right? So there's
burnout.
Always, the idea that what you love the most doing doesn't always give you enough to live off of.
Oh God, yeah.
And that's why so many people have a hard time still doing it, because we shift, or there's kids and there's family and there's this and the other. Well, so so the fact that you've continued to just do it and never really stopped
is really just the answer. It's that, well, what matters most to you? Well, if you're still doing something, even if it didn't generate the living you want or whatever else you wanted from it, then that must be something that you really love. And there's an interesting conversation going now that I've heard from more than one source, which is there is this thing that you can classify as both inspiration and complete fallacy, that is constantly repeated, which is, if you do what you love, it doesn't matter what you get from it, right? Now, listen, I think on a human level, that's true. But on a level, and by human, I mean existential, but on a living life level,
damn it,
on
pay me.
right. And I think it comes from different kinds of, like, you want to get paid for the thing you love doing. You want to be recognized for the thing you love doing. You want to be respected for it. Like, all of that stuff, the money, the respect, the recognition, like, all of that is part of that idea that let's be honest, it's not just enough to love what you, because if that were true, you would never even need to release it. You'd be like, I wrote a song, I played it for myself, I'm happy with it. You know, the rest of the world doesn't need to know about that. The whole point of putting something out in the world is you want something back. And that thing back may just be a little nugget of love, half of somebody's ear, you know, or $1 million. But whatever it is, the honest truth about it is you want something back. And my contention with all of this is, no matter what you're doing, is that everyone who, with deliberation and love and diligence, I'm going to pause for a second.
We love them pipes.
Yeah.
And when them pipes start talking to us, we stop and listen.
Yeah.
It's very,
yeah.
It's a good backing track. Continue.
But
please.
Everyone who does something with deliberation and love and diligence and really is focusing their attention and creative spark on it, and then puts it out into the world, deserves something back from it. Something.
Well, I totally agree with that. And that, you know, that's actually leads into what I was going to ask you next, which is the conversation around, I know plenty of creatives out there, myself being one of them, that I did experience complete burnout at some point when I was a photographer. Creatively, I just didn't have it anymore. I just didn't, well, not that I didn't have it, but I was burned out. And that's because I was struggling to live off of what I did. And that meant that I wasn't always what I wanted to put out there creatively. I had to change and adjust to things for work that paid the bills. And that started to get draining. And I know a lot of artists and creatives who that happens to. And so, like you're saying, our work, anybody's work, not just artistic work, but anybody's work, you want something back from it. Now, obviously, we all just want to make a living being content and happy, you know, doing something that we enjoy. But I know a lot of people who don't want to do what needs to be done, which is usually means just shifting what they do in order to make a living off of it, right? But you do want something back, right? You want something back for what it is you're creating, putting out there in the world, no matter what that is. So I've always, these questions come as 2-parters, 3-parters.
Yeah,
hang with me,
my favorite kind.
we're still getting,
my favorite kind.
we're still going in deep.
Yeah,
okay?
I'm ready.
The broader scope of everything. You have to stand way back to get really in deep. Is fame the same thing as acknowledgement, or are they two separate things?
I think it depends on where you get the fame from. And I also think that it is a version of acknowledgement.
Do you think that fame being connected to usually monetary gain is why so many people want to be famous? Or is it that really we all just want to be seen and heard and acknowledged, just like your youngest son? We really just want that. And then, of course, we just want to live a good life. Because, I mean, fame is a whole other responsibility. It really is a whole other thing. I'm not famous. I've never been famous. But it is taking it back to Lady Gaga, fame monster. It's a monster. It's something else. It's a life of its own. But it's usually connected to some sort of, cash flow in a way, I think, in some way, So do you think that really we just want to be acknowledged and to just live a good life, but maybe on a much different level than what it means to be famous, yet we tend to go out for the fame monster? more. Do you know what I mean? Like I said, I mean, there's
I
a lot
love
of
that.
there's a lot of components around that.
Yeah,
Hang
no,
with
I
us,
love that.
you know. So I mean, because in my experience, and Lord knows it's changing by the second, but I do think that a lot of people would love to just be seen and heard and acknowledged and just have a really great life without any of the fanfare. And I think that would actually be enough for a lot of us. You know what I mean?
Oh, you do. Yeah, it's like at least a two-parter.
Oh, we're
yeah,
going in so many. It's pronged.
I get it.
It's
Okay.
pronged. We got a fork. We got utensils
Yeah,
in here right
yeah,
now.
yeah. Well, okay. So you may have to remind me about that last part. What was that last part you said?
I would think that between fame and acknowledgement, because there's money attached to fame, is that why you think so many people try to become famous, as opposed
Right.
to most people, I think, would just be,
okay.
content with being acknowledged.
After I'm done this section,
Yeah, don't
can
worry.
you
I
just
got it. I got
can you
it.
just, in case I forget, just say the word money? But listen,
I will.
but I think this fame is as much a label as anything else, and that you can define it based on what you believe. So in fact, I'll just jump right into it. You know, people say money is the root of all evil. That is not an actual correct quote. It's love of money is the root of all evil. And even that, yeah, I'd say generally that's true, but that is reductive. The point being that money is a tool, and how you respond to it is what defines you. So, if your entire motivation for something is money, then that's you. If you're gaining money as a byproduct of what you're doing, and yes, you need it to live and whatever, but then you do something else with it, then that's you. And with fame, I think fame is defined by how people respond to it. So when you see, let's say, somebody who just did not handle fame well, then they may have been using fame as therapy. Well, the only way I'm going to feel good about myself is to get ultimate validation from as many people as possible. And when that happens and you realize, oh, that's not going to do it, and you implode, you have trouble dealing with fame. Or if you're using fame as a way to just rake money in from people, like people who, and I don't want to criticize, but people who maybe write certain books that are very enticing to people to read because they're the kind of books that make you feel like you're good and you're doing something to your life. But really the end result is there is one person and maybe their team in the world that's getting any real tangible benefit from this. Then you see what that fame, where the fame motivation is and how they're responding to that. And the people that I admire the most are the ones who use their fame to do more of what they do best.
Oh, yes.
So you talk about, like, let's say, again, I just keep going back to the same artist, but whatever. Beastie Boys were so young when they hit it big, even though they had been around for a few years before then. They realized in the first few years that they weren't handling fame well, and they regrouped. And ever since that regrouping, which was late 80s, early 90s, everything else they did, you could tell, whether it was starting, Grand Royal, their record company, and their zine and all that, and bringing on new artists and everything that they did, they took the fame and the money and the recognition they were getting to do more exploration in their music and do more with their music, and to not allow anyone else to define the boundaries of their music. So they were like, yeah, fame, and what I'm gonna, or another example, Bono, they're pretty much U2 from beginning to end. And the more you look back, the more you're like, okay, yeah, some variation, but it's U2. Does everything he can to use his fame to do other good things in the world. So you can see that, to me, you define fame the way you define any other label.
Is this one, are you using money?
Oh, nah, I already.
I was gonna say,
well, no, you know what? Yes, you know what? Thank you. Because
Then I'm
I
bringing
made
it
a
all the
point,
way back
yes.
around.
And that idea of, and unfortunately, and I said this in another podcast, whether you want to say it's the USA or the world, we live in a winner takes all society, which is the more you get, the more you get. The more you have, the more you get. The less you have, the less you get. Whether that's with social programs and just earning a living, or with fame and recognition and all of that stuff. So the people and companies who need the money the least are the ones who get it the most. And the vice versa. And that goes back to the idea of everyone who does something of value deserves some recognition from it. And we are unfortunately working within a system where the amount of recognition you get, whether it's monetary or in other ways, does not necessarily correspond to the value of what you do or the amount of work you put in. But then when you hit a certain, let's say, tipping point, and then somebody's like, oh, you did this and now you're famous for that, then all of a sudden it comes rushing in. And that's the other people I like, is those people who have that come rushing in, like, you know, the Beastie Boys, or even so many Prince, will take other artists and try to nurture them.
Oh, absolutely.
Or do some other charitable thing with the money, or whatever it is. They're saying, oh, wow. So, you know, I gamed the system. I found that tipping point. I was lucky, or whatever, however you want to say that it happened. And I'm not just going to take that for granted and say, yeah, I deserved that, even though they did deserve it. I'm going to do something else with it that makes it even better, that moves the conversation forward, that moves that financial and artistic conversation forward.
So with that, you handled that prong, that fork really
I like
well.
prong. Yeah.
Going back to above everything that you are loving about this podcast, and connecting with people and connecting with other artists and community and everyone who is tuning in, still your desire is to connect with your music, it being your greatest connector and offering in this world. Would you say that you are seeking fame from your music, or acknowledgement? Or you just need to get paid more?
Well,
money. Okay.
You basically named everything, right? And
Right.
and I think that you know, I think a mix of all of those is what I'm seeking. You know, I think that kind of recognition, which just means people know about it and it's out there, and somebody would say, hey, Rec, you know, or Nick DeMatteo, or whatever it is.
Yes, because you get just as excited as somebody on SoundCloud listening to one of your tracks and
Right.
making a comment on it as you are about anything. I
Right.
mean, like you just love to, you know, have that acknowledgement and that conversation.
Oh my
around
God.
it. You go, I mean, some people, it's not all fanfare. Sometimes it's not all just, you know, blowing smoke or anything like that, or just complimentary. It's just somebody acknowledging it and just giving you any sort of feedback.
It's
You're
a form
always
of
so
connection.
welcome.
Yeah.
You always welcome it.
And that is at the level of recognition or fame or whatever you want to call it. And it's like my song Gold from Rec's album Parts and Labor. It's not a new song, right? For some reason, perennially, it gets tens and hundreds of thousands of streams. It's not my favorite song even of mine, you know, but there are people out there listening to it. I don't even know what they think of it, but it's being streamed and heard. So that's recognition. That's one level. I think then we're going in the wrong direction, but the highest level for me then would be the second thing, which is respect. And that comes from when anytime, and I love this, and I thank everyone who's ever been a part of this, but anytime I have ever played my music for or with other musicians, they've been like, oh my God, dude, I love it. And that kind of feeling, or if a critic writes something good about what I've done, or if a fan, you know, like a guy I worked with on a play 20 some years ago, wrote to me last year saying, your song On the Way Down got me through medical school. So that's not recognition. That's that acknowledgement. That's respect. That's that sense of a validation on an artistic level.
You've touched somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all of those things, I think that's the highest for me. And then
because so many artists have touched you back, and I mean,
maybe
like
that's
said,
why.
like,
Yeah.
like you said, like, I mean, music has literally saved you.
Yeah.
Through the hardest, the best, the ups, the downs. I mean, through your whole.
It's
entire
always
life.
been there
It's your
for me,
constant.
and it always will be. And you know, my family jokes about how my dad in particular, you know, somebody will say something and that triggers like a lyric to a song and everything. And yeah, that's a trivia thing and whatever. But I think it's also goes to the idea that music is such a connector and a you know, a comfort in that, in the puzzle of a brain that you know, certain people have, me included, that it becomes, it's too vital. And so what you write, what I get from that is what I want to give back, because I want to be a part of that. I want to be able to say, well, shoot, you know, there are times where, like this one song of Block Party's first album, when I first heard it, I just got the chills all over my body. And when I hear it now, it may not be as strong the chills, but I'm like, oh, it just sends me to a place. And to be able to do that for others,
you want to affect people.
Holy God,
you want
yeah.
your music to affect people.
And if the byproduct of that is that I'm making money from it, well, all that really does is it facilitates. Because the older I get, the more I realize I'm not ashamed to say I hate money. I hate the idea of having to do anything with money, of having to earn any money, because the work has always been more important to me. But because we all need it in some way or another, then there's an element of, I would say, relief, that when something you do brings in a tool like money that you can then use for other vital things, whether it be living or your kids or your dog or
making more music too,
or making more music, then you've created this circle that you hope is self-sustaining, to where, no, I'm not going out and working, you know, a 40-hour day job that's draining me, and then hopefully I'll have time to do this other art, but it's because this is the money that's being funneled in. But the thing I'm actually doing is the thing that's creating the money I need to keep doing it. So all of those things, I think, are important.
So I'm going to selfishly just turn the tables on that whole money mantra for a second. No, we love money. Money good.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's how you bring it in.
Tool.
That's
it's
yes.
just energy.
Yes, money is my.
It's just a concept that we created as an exchange.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Bags of salt.
And with that, we are coming up on our time pretty soon here. I say that because that's what you say to
yes.
other people when
the
you're
rule book
them.
says,
you said that to me. Well, you get to make up all the rules, so I'm just following your playbook. And so before we wrap it up, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Always. Always.
We live together. We don't talk enough.
No, never.
I am being
never get enough.
No, I love talking to you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be here if I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have delightfully, playfully stalked you on YouTube and all of your music and
video that's
offerings
validating
before we even got together.
I know.
So
you always know more than I think you do.
Absolutely.
Very flattering.
Hey, it's scary times. You need to vet people, okay? Did my best. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And you didn't have to hire somebody and pay them to do it for you. You did it yourself. You know, that's initiative.
Just that good.
Yeah.
So with that, Nick DeMatteo.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would like to say to your audience as you are in the guest chair, or anything that you would like to note, or anything just to wrap up your feelings about today's conversation? We are all ears.
Wow. Well, yeah, I guess there are a couple of things. I think, first of all, I want to be clear that, and I try to say this with every podcast, that anyone who has ever watched any of these, or listened, or read any of the text I include, or clicked on anything, or found my music and listened to any of that and all of that, I'm extremely grateful for that. And that, you know, they say don't look at the numbers, and I understand why, because there's more to life than how many views you get and whatever. But in all honesty, even if a video of mine got 5 views, then I'm like, there's 5 people out there who saw that and who heard that, you know, or if a song of mine got streams or whatever. So I think that to me, I never want to seem ungrateful for that. At the same time, this is something that I'm working with as a tool to try to build more. And that building more is not exclusive. It should be inclusive. And that inclusiveness comes from doing interviews. It comes from trying to bring in other artists and things like that, and everything. But in order to do that, I need your help. I need that connection, and that help can come from some pretty important things, like don't be afraid to explore Patreon for anybody who's on there. I found some wonderful artists on there, and if you go to patreon.com/musicisnotagenre, you will find things that you can't find elsewhere. But more than that, you're part of the little family. You know, it's bringing that the important, you know, a couple of dollars in or whatever it is each month that makes it a little easier on this end to do these things, or to, you know, donate on anchor.fm/musicisnotagenre, which can be anything you want and things like that. It's hard for me to voice that because of my relationship with money. But I believe that what I'm doing is valuable enough that it warrants, you know, asking for that and hoping for that, and hopefully getting a degree of that to the point where this is its own sustainable thing. And I guess the only other thing I would say is thank you for doing this, because you know how much I love interviews and I love being on both sides of them. So this was a real treat. And you're great at it.
Thank you very much. There's probably going to be more of these, because Nick loves to talk and he always pulls me into
I
it.
smell podcast offshoot. Yeah.
But I think in the end, everybody, thank you so much for joining this second season interview edition of Music is Not a Genre podcast. I am Cathryn Lynne. This has been a pleasure interviewing you, Nick DeMatteo.
Thank you.
And we will see you next time. Thank you so much.
Awkwardly stare into the camera while I fade out.
3, 2